Hello everyone, and welcome back to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. We are currently in the Infinite Forbidden format, and we only have about a couple weeks to maybe about a month max until the next ban list drops. So what that means is that we possibly only have a month left with Gimmick Puppet. And unless we somehow avoid the ban list and we don't get hit, this deck, as it is right now, is only going to be playable for the next month. But do not worry, we have many other options and many other ideas already in mind in case Gimmick Puppet does get banned. It will change slightly depending on if Sanctifier gets banned or not. I don't really see that happening. Hopefully it doesn't happen, so we will see. But anyway, today I am going to be doing some combos. We're going to be going over some 2-3 card combos mainly. I'm also just going to show a couple little interactions with the deck in general that help you play it better and help you get to the cards that you need to see, because this deck is all about getting a Gimmick Puppet to your opponent's field. You have many other lines of play around that, and this deck can function very, very well even if you don't Gimmick Puppet your opponent, and even if you set up your Gimmick Puppet and you get hit, you usually still have many other lines of play that you can do. So with that, I don't want to waste too much time, and I don't want this video to be as long as the last. So with that, today we will be discussing a couple of cards that I took out of the deck to make way for Bestials. I said in the last video that Bestials need to be a part of this deck, and I think I figured out what needed to be taken out. I'll go ahead and get into that before we get into anything else. So the side deck now looks like this: a Secret Village of the Spellcasters, 1 Terraforming, 1 Crossout Designator, 1 Imperm, another Imperm has been moved to the main. We removed the Triple Tactics talent to make way for a Druis Worm. We also got rid of a Shifter to make way for another Druis Worm, and we got rid of the Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill out of the main deck to make way for a Bestial Baldrake. And with that, our only change to the main deck was swapping out the Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill that was in the main deck for a Imperm from the side over to the main. I just think Imperm's a really good card, and I always like running it at least 2, especially if I'm running Crossout. If I'm just running Imperm, I want to run it at 3, obviously, but with the deck being tight, we run it at 2 right now, and we slide in the 3rd if we need it. The first combo we will be talking about is the combo of Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, Dark Magician, and Branded Fusion. These 3 cards together might seem like a large combo, but the thing is, you have 9 ways, we have 7 ways to see the Dark Magician. It doesn't matter how we see it, as long as we have it on the field or in our hand. Even if we hard draw the Dark Magician, that is still fine. For the Cartesia, we obviously have 2 more copies of Cartesia, but we also have 3 copies of Fusion Deployment. And actually, now that I'm saying this, let me bring it back, you do have a total of 10 ways to see the Dark Magician, because Fusion Deployment can also be used to grab your Dark Magician, as well as the 6 copies of Illusion of Chaos and Magician Souls. So you have 10 ways into Dark Magician, 6 ways into Cartesia, and then obviously you need to hard open the Brand of Fusion, which is the piece that's going to tie this whole combo together. You obviously have 2 more copies of Branded Fusion, but with that, we will go ahead and show you the combo of Cartesia, Dark Magician, and Branded Fusion. So for this combo, we will be starting out with Dark Magician, Blazing Cartesia, and Branded Fusion, because this is the worst case scenario for this combo, being that we're not using souls to get a few extra things in the graveyard to get our Dark Magician, and we have 2 other cards in hand that do not matter. This is a go in first deck, and well, yeah, we're going to start out normal summoning our copy of Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, and then directly after, we will be activating our Branded Fusion. Obviously, you don't want to get interrupted in any of this, or your combo is over, but as long as you don't get interrupted, you're fine. At that point, we'll be sending another copy of Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous to the graveyard, as well as a copy of our Fallen of Albaz. We will now resolve our Branded Fusion, summoning our copy of Albion the Branded Dragon. We'll go ahead and just summon that in defense up there. Now, on the summon of Albion the Branded Dragon, we will activate his effect to banish a card from hand, field, and or graveyard, or multiple cards, to fuse into a monster. We would wait for our opponent to activate a chain, and if they don't, we will activate Blazing Cartesia, Even if they do, we'll activate Blazing Cartesia and hopefully avoid, as long as we're getting hit by like a Veiler or an Imperm or something. We will then fuse our Dark Magician and our Albion the Branded together, making our copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. At this point, Albion would resolve, and we would go ahead and banish our copy of Blazing Cartesia and our copy of Dark Magician. And this would make our copy of Granguignol the Dust Dragon. We would now activate the on-summon effect of Granguignol the Dust Dragon to send a Gimmick Puppet Nightmare from our deck to the graveyard. And at this point, we have 2 cards in hand. We have a Dragoon with a Negation live on field. We have Granguignol, so if your opponent summons something by an activated monster effect, you can summon either a Quem or Lulu Lilith from your deck or extra deck. But at this point, we'll go ahead and proceed to our end phase, activating our Albion the Branded Dragon, which will search us our Branded in red. Where is it? There we go. And that will set Branded in red to our field. So at this point, we would pass the turn over to our opponent, and immediately after your opponent draws, you would go ahead and shotgun your Branded in red, adding your copy of Fallen Albaz to your hand, and immediately fusion summoning with your Cartesia. This will banish both your Cartesia and your Albaz, and it will make you a copy of Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, which you can go ahead and activate, targeting your Albion the Branded Dragon and your Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, summoning Albion back to your field and giving your opponent the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. I would usually go ahead and give that to your opponent in defense position, just in case they want to just swing into one of your monsters and then hit you with an evenly. So I think defense is usually better, but it really depends on the scenario. Sometimes you want an attack so you could just swing over and get easy win on the next turn. That was the first scenario with Blazing Cartesia, Dark Magician, and Branded Fusion, but you also have 2 other lines that you can go into that are also very viable. This is just, I believe, the best line in this specific deck if you have these 3 cards, at least for the most part. But with that, we'll go into the next one. So for scenario 2, we start with the same cards in hand, and we'll do pretty much the exact same thing. We will normal summon our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, and immediately after activate our Branded Fusion, sending our copies of Blazing Cartesia and Fallen of Albaz to the graveyard. At this point, we would go ahead and summon into our copy of Albion the Branded Dragon, and we will do the same line, just the same as we did last time. Activate Albion, chain Cartesia, and at this point, we would fuse together Dark Magician and Albion, making our copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Now, Albion would do the same thing again, and it would resolve in the graveyard, and at this point, you can do one of 2 things. You can either banish your Dark Magician and your Albaz to make a second copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. So at this point, this field is very self-explanatory. You have 2 Dragoons, and you still have 2 cards in hand, plus you will be searching another card for the end phase and adding another card to your hand at the end phase. The other scenario that we can do right here is, instead of banishing Dark Magician and Albion the Branded Dragon, we can banish our Fallen of Albaz and our Albion the Branded Dragon, and instead of going into a second Dragoon, you can go into a Mirrorjade the Iceblade Dragon. So now at this point, you have a Dragoon negate, and you have a Mirrorjade on the field that can go ahead and banish a monster, and also if it leaves the field, it will nuke all monsters on your opponent's board. With the Cartesia to hand at the end of the turn, because you do still get Cartesia to your hand since a fusion did go to your graveyard, you will now have 3 cards in hand at the end of the turn in this scenario, and with this, you can also fuse your Cartesia on your opponent's main phase after they do anything with the other Cartesia in your hand, or potentially any of these other 2 cards you have in hand. At this point, you can go ahead and make a Granguignol, and you could do a few things at this point. You can send a Garura to the graveyard to draw another card. Maybe you can send a Gimmick Puppet if you have a way to set up an Albion the Sanctifier. Those are probably the best options. You could also send another Albion the Branded Dragon from your extra deck to the graveyard, get a Branded Fusion. There's a myriad of things that you can do, but what Granguignol will also be in this situation is another Interruption. Very strong end board off of 3 cards that are very accessible, and even though it is a 3-card combo, you will see these 3 cards very often. Another one of the best combos in the deck is the 2-card combo of Nadir Servant and Duality, and for this test we will go ahead and do the exact same thing, put us in a go in first scenario with 3 other cards face down because it does not matter what else we have. Nadir on its own is a 1-card Gimmick Puppet lock, but with Duality it just becomes much stronger. So in this scenario, we're obviously relying on the fact that Nadir does not get hit by a Ghost Spell or an Ash, but we're just going to hope that doesn't happen. We're going to go ahead and activate our Nadir Servant. At this point, we would send our Tri-Brigade Arms Bucephalus 2 to the graveyard, and then we would go ahead and search our Dogmatica Maximus from the deck. Nadir would now resolve and go to the graveyard, and then we would activate Tri-Brigade Arms Bucephalus from the graveyard. Since it was sent to the graveyard, you can send a Beast or Winged Beast to the graveyard, and we will send Brigran the Glory Dragon so that we can get an Albaz to our hand at the end of this turn. What this also does is leaves you with one extra card in the graveyard that you can banish, so you can banish your Tri-Brigade Arms Bucephalus and summon your Maximus. And other lines in this, you can also summon send Garura off a Nadir, because you could also banish that without losing any important end phase effects and get a draw off of it. But for this specific line, we need the Albaz, and if we don't have an Albaz in our hand, then we need to make sure that we get it. If we have some other pieces in our hand to fulfill some of the end phase effects we would be using, then we can send a Garura. But in this case, we will be sending off the Tri-Brigade to banish it for our Maximus. So we will now summon our Maximus and activate Maximus's effect. Maximus will send our Albion, the Branded Dragon, as well as our Despian Lulu Lilith from our extra deck to the graveyard. Our opponent would also send 2, and at this point, the only other thing we would do with our turn is set our Duality. Well, until the end phase, that is. End phase, we're going to be activating a bunch of effects. So first, we will activate our Lulu Lilith. You might want to use this in a certain order depending on what you think your opponent has, if they have any interruptions, but right now, we're just going assuming that our opponent does not have any interruptions. So we will summon a spellcaster whose attack equals its own defense, a light spellcaster that is, from our deck. That will be our Blazing Cartesia in defense. We will now resolve our Albion the Branded Dragon, grabbing our Branded in red and setting that to our field. And finally, we will be grabbing a Fallen of Albaz and adding that into our hand. You can also special summon it, and it might be useful at times, but in this specific line with Nadir, I see no reason to special summon it. I would rather just add it to my hand. So we will now pass the turn over to our opponent. Immediately after our opponent draws, we will be activating our Duality, pitching off our Dogmatica Maximus to cheat out a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon to the field. We have multiple cards in hand, so now at this point we can negate one of our opponent's interruptions, which usually means that you are able to get your Gimmick Puppet to your opponent's field in this scenario. We will now wait until the main phase, wait for our opponent to activate anything, and when they do, we will go ahead and activate our Blazing Cartesia as Chain 2, fusing together our Fallen of Albaz and our Blazing Cartesia. This will give us a copy of Granganule the Dust Dragon, and on Granganule's summon, we will be activating its effect to send a light or dark level 6 or higher from extra deck or deck to graveyard. That will be our Gimmick Puppet, but before we do that, we will go ahead and chain our Branded in red, targeting our Fallen of Albaz in the graveyard and attempting to add it to our hand. If it does go to our hand, we immediately fusion summon using our Fallen of Albaz and Granganule the Dust Dragon. In this scenario, you do lose your Granganule interruption, which is a little bit unfortunate, but the payoff is much better. So at this point, we will banish those two, summoning into our Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, and then now we would go ahead and resolve our Granganule, going into our deck to grab our copy of Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. And after Gimmick Puppet Nightmare goes to the graveyard, you can actually immediately go ahead and start a new chain with Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, targeting your Gimmick Puppet. And at this point, it's really dealer's choice what you were going to summon. You obviously can't summon any of these three because they were not properly summoned. So you're either summoning back a Cartesia or Maximus to your side of the field. If you're afraid of getting hit, Maximus does have 3,000 defense, so it is pretty good. You've already sent most of your targets in your graveyard in your extra deck at this point, so you probably won't be using Maximus next turn. So you might want Cartesia for further fusion. Maybe if you have a Duality in your hand, you can make another Dragoon off of that. It really just depends, but at this point, you summon one of these back. We'll just go ahead and say Cartesia in this situation, and you summon the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare to your opponent. So that's the 2-card combo that gives you a Dragoon and a Gimmick Puppet Nightmare to your opponent through Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, which is a really fun line. If you see Nadir in your hand, you're already happy, but if you see Nadir and Duality, you're very, very happy. Another very funny Nadir interaction is with Magician's Souls and Guiding Quem the Virtuous. This could also be a copy of Cartesia, but you're usually going to go into something else if you have those 2 cards together. Obviously, Souls can also be your copy of Illusion of Chaos, so that is why I also have this right here. But for purposes of this, we are going to be talking about these 3 cards because I think it's just a pretty funny line. You're probably not always going to go into it, but depending on the matchup, it might be pretty huge. So for this line, we're also going to be making a Gimmick Puppet Nightmare to our opponent's field. You guessed right. First, we're going to be activating our Magician Souls, which will send our Dark Magician for cost, and at that point, we will be sending Souls to the graveyard to special summon our Dark Magician. We would then go ahead and normal summon our Guiding Quem the Virtuous and use its effect to send either a Cartesia or Albaz to the graveyard. Right now, I am going to go ahead and just send a Fallen of Albaz. At this point, we're going to go ahead and synchro a 7 and a 4 into our copy of Psychic End Punisher, which is a very funny card if you don't know what he does. As long as your life points are equal to or less than your opponent's, he is unaffected by activated monster effects. Obviously, your opponent could swing into one of your monsters and then swing into him after, but just depending on the game state, he's a very good card, and sometimes he's very hard to out. And we're doing this because usually you are not going to be synchroing because you cannot fusion after if you're fusion locked by something like Brand of Fusion, Fusion Deployment, or Lubellion. But in this specific hand, we're going to be using Nadir after to do a bunch of stuff on our opponent's turn and on our end phase. So the synchro doesn't matter too much right now. We're going to activate Nadir, and we're going to go into the same line that we did before to make our Gimmick Puppet Nightmare onto our opponent's field through Sanctifier. So we will send Tribrigade Arms Bucephalus, and we will go ahead and search once more our Dogmatica Maximus. It's always on the top. Search our Dogmatica Maximus, and then we will go ahead and activate Tribrigade Arms Bucephalus 2, sending off our Brigrand the Glory Dragon, and at that point we will summon our Maximus by banishing our Bucephalus 2. We will activate Maximus once more, sending off a Lulu and sending off an Albion Branded Dragon. And at that point, we will go ahead and go to end phase. And on our end phase, we have a few effects we can activate. It's all the same effects as before, so we'll speed through these a little bit. We will add Blazing Cartesia to our field, special summon it in defense off of Lulu with Lilith. We will go ahead and grab a Albaz and add it to our hand. And actually, in this situation, you could have also sent a Garura off of your Nadir so that you could still get your Maximus to the field. I sent an Albaz right here, and I'm grabbing an Albaz just because this is more of like a worst case scenario situation. Obviously, with Quem, you can send whatever. You could send a Cartesia in this scenario to get a Cartesia back to your hand at the end phase to get some more hand advantage, but sometimes with the Quem in the graveyard, I think it's kind of fun to have more Albaz in rotation because you could obviously special summon them for more interruption. And finally, we will be grabbing our Branded in red from Albion, the Branded Dragon being in the graveyard, and we will go ahead and set that to our field. At this point, we would pass over to our opponent, and we would do a very similar line again. We could wait until main phase, and we will go ahead and activate our Blazing Cartesia, the Virtuous, and chain to anything that our opponent does, fusioning together our Blazing Cartesia and our Albaz to make a copy of Granguignol the Dust Dragon. Granguignol the Dust Dragon would then go ahead and activate its effect, and we would go ahead and chain our Brandon Red, adding an Albaz back to our hand, and then immediately fusion summoning. This time we would fusion summon our Maximus and Albaz together so that we can keep Granguignol as an interruption. This will bring us into our Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. Granguignol would now resolve, sending our copy of Gimmick Puppet Nightmare from the deck to the graveyard, and then now you can go ahead and activate your Albion to target your Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, and in this situation, I would like to target my Quem. You could also summon a Albaz and then go into Gimmick Puppet, do a Lubellion kind of thing, discard a card, and then get into a Dragoon. That's also a very valid line. You still have a card in hand, so you still have a negate. But at this point, I think it's a little more fun to go into a Quem, because if your opponent happens to well, they're really not going to be special summoning, but you can still do fun stuff. So at this point, we will be summoning our Guiding Quem the Virtuous to our field and defense position, and when you summon that, you can also send another copy of Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous to your graveyard, which is just kind of fun. You now have 2 Cartesias in your graveyard, so you don't really need it, but you have it. And now you have Quem as interruption, you have Psychic End Punisher, you have Granguignol as an interruption. You could have gone into a Dragoon as well if you summon an Albaz right here. Very fun line, very fun line. When you can get your Psychic End Punisher, your Albion, and potentially your Dragoon or something else on the field, it's just very fun. So that was the line of Quem, Dark Magician, and Nadir. The next few combos we're going to be talking about are combos that help you dig into your deck to see the engine that you need. It doesn't need to be this exact set of cards, but Magician's Souls, Cartesia, and Soul Servant are all cards that can very much help you get into this. I will show you another line with just the Dark Magician engine as well, but for this one, we're going to go ahead and do the same that we always do. Put 2 cards in hand over here that don't matter, and first we're going to be activating our Magician's Souls, sending either our Dark Magician or Mahad for cost. If you want to draw into a Brain Infusion to try to facilitate a Gimmick Puppet lock a little easier with Sanctifier, you'll want to send your Mahad. So you will send the Mahad at this point, summon your souls, and you would go ahead and activate your souls, sending off your Soul Servant to draw a random card. At this point, we will be summoning our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, and then we'll be using our Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous to fuse these cards together, that is Blazing Cartesia plus a light or dark, to make your Yugioh the Dust Dragon. Yugioh the Dust Dragon at this point, it's really up to you. You can either send off a Garura, which is a pretty good one because if you don't get another fusion to your graveyard, you get your Blazing Cartesia back to your hand at the end of the turn, and you also get a draw. But you could also send your Dark Magician from deck if you need access to your Dark Magician, or if you just want to get the draw to have a Soul Servant, but either way, we're getting a draw too. Right now, we'll go ahead and just send the Garura for the sake of gaining more hand advantage. We will draw another card, and then at this point, we will banish our Soul Servant from the graveyard, since we have a Mahad in the graveyard, and we will draw one more card. We are now perfectly neutral on hand advantage that we were before. We have a few more cards in the graveyard, and we now have 5 cards in hand. And like I said, we could also, instead of sending the Garura, we can send a Dark Magician to the graveyard just to have a little more stuff in the graveyard. But at this point, say if we did absolutely nothing else, we just go to the end phase and we get a Cartesia back to hand. This obviously isn't anything, but we have 5 other cards in hand, which probably are something and will probably allow us to further our game state. So that's just a real quick line to drawing more cards out of your deck. Another very standard line we have is Magician's Souls and Illusion of Chaos, or Magician's Souls and Magician's Rod. You do not need all 3 of these, you just need 2 because Illusion of Chaos can search you the other. So let's just say, for reference, we just have Magician's Rod and Illusion of Chaos, and then obviously 3 other cards in our hand. So at this point, we would go ahead and activate our Illusion of Chaos, searching us our Magician's Souls, and then putting 1 random card back on the top of the deck. We'll just use Illusion of Chaos for this scenario. Sometimes you still might want to keep them in hand, so since we don't know what these other cards are, we'll go ahead and just put 1 of these back on top of the deck. At this point, we'll go ahead and activate our Magician's Souls, sending our copy of, again, either Dark Magician or Mahad, depending on what you are trying to draw into. If you want, basically, if you draw into a Branded Fusion and you send Mahad, you can immediately make a Sanctifier and then facilitate a Gimmick Puppet lock off of that. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and send our Dark Magician, special summoning our Magician's Souls. We will then normal summon our Magician's Rod, searching us our copy of Soul Servant. At this point, we would go ahead and activate Souls, sending off our Soul Servant to get a card, and then we will banish our Soul Servant, gaining another card. There are a lot of scenarios where you can also send off a Mahad and a Dark Magician in the same turn, so you can potentially get 2 off of this, but for right now, we have another 5 cards in hand, so just another line that can get a few things in your graveyard, get a few bodies on the board, and then also get you back to the exact amount of cards in hand that you previously had. I did not plan on showing any type of digital Yu-Gi-Oh gameplay during this video, but I want to go ahead and show off just how much you can maximize your drawing in this deck. So what we are doing right now is we're special summoning our Magician's Souls by sending off either a copy of Mahad or Dark Magician to the graveyard, and then we are sending off 2 spell cards. Right now, Soul Servant is one of them. Soul Servant is very important to maximize in this. Next up, we are going to fuse with our Cartesia with our Dark Magician, because now we have 2 named cards for Soul Servant in the graveyard. We're already up 2 cards. We're going to now fuse into the Yugioh, send off a Garura, and draw 1 more card. We are now up 3 cards, and what we can do now is go ahead and activate our Soul Servant, since we have a Mahad and a Dark Magician in our graveyard, drawing 2 more cards. Now at a total of 5, we can now send our Duality from the graveyard, from the graveyard to banished, shuffling in 2 cards and drawing us our 6th card. At this point, we're just activating a Duality and going into a Dragoon. This is probably something you would do earlier in the line, but yeah. These are all the main combos that I wanted to talk about in this video without it being insanely too long, but I did want to mention that every combo that involves Dark Magician and Cartesia can also be done if you are playing Secret of Dark Magic, as Secret of Dark Magic basically acts as a Cartesia so long as you have a Dark Magician to fuse with to make a monster. So all of the lines that include Albion the Branded Dragon plus Dark Magician can also be facilitated with the Secrets of Dark Magic, which is very good because that will gain you a branded fusion at the end of the turn. Say hi to my cat. Next off, I just wanted to show all of the duality that the card Duality has. These are all targets for the card Duality in this deck. You might notice over here that Borreload Furious Dragon is not in the deck, but it is something that you can play in the deck if you want to have a target for Lubellion the Searing Dragon. I used to run this card very often. I still think it's very good. The extra deck is just pretty tight right now, but if you wanted to, Borreload is awesome because it can help you get rid of back row inside of your deck. All you need to do is get a Branded Fusion and a Duality, and going first, you now have access to getting rid of back row. So it's pretty huge. I think it's really good. If I can find a way to fit it back in, I definitely would. Albion the Branded can always tag itself out into Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, which is amazing. If you get Branded Fusion plus Duality, you make an Albion the Branded Dragon, you tag out Albion the Branded Dragon into Sanctifier, and then you resolve Branded Dragon to make a Granguignol, send off your Gimmick Puppet, and there you go. It's a Gimmick Puppet off of Branded Fusion and Duality. That was a combo that I want to show off in this video, but I felt like I could just quickly mention it at the end without showing off the whole thing, since you've already seen what you could do with a lot of these cards. Dogmatica Maximus and Granguignol the Dust Dragon, as we've seen, can also tag out into Red Eyes Dark Dragoon or Master of Chaos, but you don't get the on-summon effect, so really, if you're tagging out with Duality, 99% of the time, you probably want a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, unless you need to wipe the board and you have other ways to do it without summoning a Light or Dark from your graveyard with Master of Chaos. Duality should not be slept on. It is one of, if not like the best card in the deck. It allows you to do so much, even though it needs to be in conjunction with other cards. You have so much access to all these other cards that just make you really easy to make boss monsters. Before this ends, I just wanted to show off one funny interaction with Mirrorjade that a lot of people might already know. I'm sure a lot do, but I've also met a lot of people who don't know about this interaction. I think it's very funny, and it can help you get out of a lot of very problematic situations. So for this example, I'm going to be using Chaos Angel and Psychic End Punisher as an example of monsters on our opponent's board, just because they are both big boss monsters that are unaffected by the activated effects of monsters. Psychic End Punisher, that is anytime your opponent's life points are lower than yours, he will be unaffected. That's if you are the one controlling the Psychic End Punisher, that is. And Chaos Angel, if it is at full power, it is unaffected by monster effects and cannot be destroyed by battle. So let's go ahead and say that our opponent has these monsters on their field, and we've went ahead and summoned a Mirrorjade the Iceblade Dragon. Now, would you say that just by looking at this, Mirrorjade beats both of these monsters? You might not see it at first, but the thing about Mirrorjade is that Mirrorjade has a delayed effect. You activate it when it leaves the field to wipe the board, but it does not activate when it wipes the board at the end of the field. That is a delayed effect that just resolves at the end of the turn during the end phase. So what you would do in this situation is you would go ahead and just crash your Mirrorjade into either the Chaos Angel or the Psychic End Punisher in battle phase. It would destroy your Mirrorjade. You activate Mirrorjade effect, and then at end phase, these get wiped because they are unaffected by activated effects, and this is not an activated effect. It activated when it first went off, but after that, it is just an effect that is resolving. So because of that, they get wiped. It's just an interaction that that I've noticed a fair amount of people aren't familiar with. Sometimes when I do it to people, they're like, wait, what? How do you destroy this? Just want to show that off because it's very strong. And with that, we're going to bring this combo video to an end. Thank you so much for watching once more. There will be a test hand video very soon, as promised. Very excited to bring that one out because I'm very excited to show off how consistent this deck really is. Obviously, it's Yu-Gi-Oh, so, you know, it might not be perfect, but I think that most of the time, probably like 90% of the time, you are going to get a Gimmick Puppet to your opponent's field with this deck. So thank you so much. Test hands very soon. And yeah, I don't have anything else to say. See you guys next time.